But first, there's this. The Pentagon sending a second aircraft carrier to the Middle East as President Trump keeps the pressure on Iran to make a deal on its nuclear weapons program and its ballistic missiles. Here's the president yesterday. Watch.
We have to make a deal, otherwise it's going to be very traumatic. Very traumatic. I don't want that to happen, but we have to make a deal. They should have made a deal the first time, and they got Midnight Hammer instead. And this will be very traumatic for Iran if they don't make a deal. Look, if they don't make a deal, then it'll be a different story. But we had a very good meeting yesterday with Bibi Netanyahu, and he understands, but it's ultimately up to me. If the deal isn't a very fair deal and a very good deal with Iran, then it's going to be, I think, a very difficult time for them.
President Trump met with the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu on Wednesday, who stressed Israel's security needs and pushed to disable Tehran's ballistic missile program. The president reportedly telling Netanyahu that the U.S. prefers diplomacy and making a deal. Joining me now, a major figure in U.S. relations with the Middle East, a four-star general who served more than 37 years in the military, 6 consecutive commands as general officer, including command of the surge in Iraq, CENTCOM, and the coalition forces in Afghanistan. Former CIA Director David Petraeus is with us right now. General, it's wonderful to have you here this morning. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good to be with you, Maria.
And I want to begin right there in terms of Iran. How would you assess the situation today? Do you believe Iran has been deterred?
Well, the big question is whether or not Iran is willing to make some compromises on its very hardline stance on its nuclear program, and also whether there can be introduction, as you mentioned, Prime Minister Netanyahu urging President Trump to add discussions of the Iran missile program as well. The next round of talks is being scheduled. They had one already, as you will recall. No breakthroughs there. Apparently a positive conversation in some characterizations, but certainly no budge by Iran on its nuclear program. And given the hardline ideologue supreme leader, it's not clear to me that they really are going to recognize the reality with, in a few days, 2 entire aircraft carrier task forces in and around Iran. You have other assets that are in Jordan, refuelers in Qatar. B-2 bombers, of course, can fly all the way from the United States and drop their bombs, as they did in the final day of the 12-day war. So the question is, and the president captured that, will they be willing to negotiate seriously, or are they going to have to face very, very considerable military strikes by the United States?
And do you recommend that in terms of those strikes? You know, the people of Iran are pleading with the president to get involved here. And the president recently said help is on the way. Should we expect that things are going to escalate?
They will, unless, again, Iran shows flexibility that it has not been willing to show so far in the latest negotiations. They know what can be done to them. You know, they're basically defenseless at this point, Maria. They've lost all of their air and ballistic missile defenses. The Israelis took those out with the F-35s that we'd provided them earlier. We hammered their nuclear program. The missile program is dramatically degraded, although that deserves some more military attention because the Iranians have been trying to rebuild that in the months since the 12-day air campaign. So again, the choice is pretty clear. They either make some significant compromises on the nuclear program, ideally also on their missile program, and even some of their support for the proxies, the nefarious proxies in the region, Hezbollah, Hamas, and others, or you were going to see the U.S. military in very, very substantial capabilities demonstrated to Iran. And I'm sure that it will be quite an inclusive strike. It'll go, and again, anything that's left of the nuclear program, the missile program, the retaliatory capabilities, I would hope even including the boats that can lay mines in the Strait of Hormuz, which is a concern. And keep in mind, by the way, that the Gulf states, they're a bit apprehensive about this. They're actually cautioning. They're doing quite well in a number of different respects, and they're a bit worried about the instability that could result from this. But again, I think the choice is quite stark. It's up to the Iranians to make a decision. If they do not show seriousness of purpose in negotiating on the nuclear program, they're going to be on the receiving end of an awful lot of military power.
And that is exactly what I was going to ask you next about our allies in the Middle East. President Trump has strengthened those relationships. What are our allies saying right now about this tension spiking with Iran? I mean, I feel like it's an easy one for the Iranian leadership to just say we won't support these dangerous proxies, but they haven't said that. So what about those relations in the Middle East? What does President Trump need to understand right now about how they're feeling?
Well, he has heard from them. They have conveyed, again, I'm talking really about the core countries in the Gulf Cooperation Council, the GCC states. They're a bit apprehensive about this. They're actually in a very good situation. In the 2 years since the horrible 10/7 attacks by Hamas on Israel, Hezbollah has been dramatically degraded in Lebanon. Syria is no longer an ally of Iran. The Shia militia in Iraq are basically on a knee. And the capabilities of Iran have been dramatically degraded. So they're actually in a pretty good place. They're a bit uncertain about what might happen if there is substantial strikes and there is unrest within Iran. We've seen that before in the region, in a number of different countries, of course. So there's a bit of caution on their part. And that negotiation, that discussion, I'm sure will continue as the U.S. figures out what the overall options are and what is the absolute red line for Iran relative to its nuclear program and the missile program.
And of course, President Trump has shown incredible leadership in terms of peace with the Abraham Accords. He was close to getting the Saudis to join the Abraham Accords. But General, if you were advising the president today, broaden out for us, what would you say is the single biggest threat to America's national security in this year and the coming years?
Well, I think it has to be all China all the time. China is a possible adversary. It's certainly a very, very severe competitor right now in the global economy. It's heartening to see that the two presidents met back late last year in Korea. It's good to see that there are additional meetings scheduled for this year, the first one coming up in April. But at the end of the day, there are real structural differences here. Deterrence in the Indo-Pacific really is the major mission of the U.S. military, noting that, yes, the administration has added new emphasis to securing our borders, activities in the Western Hemisphere, and so forth. But at the end of the day, it really is the U.S. and Western allies and partners' relationship with China that is the biggest plate in the tent, if you want to use the metaphorical image of the United States as the guy in the circus who's keeping a lot of plates spinning. And the plates represent threats, challenges, issues that we have to try to resolve if we can, or deal with if ultimate resolution is not possible. And we have allies and partners to help do that, many of them right here at Munich right now, and that extends far beyond just the European countries of NATO and Canada. Then, obviously, the concern is what Russia is doing in Ukraine. In many respects, Ukraine is fighting our collective war for us. The principal adversary, far and away, of course, in the European continent, is Russia and what they're trying to do to Ukraine, trying to essentially to subjugate them. The negotiations have been ongoing. There's been no serious indication that the Russians are really seriously negotiating, whereas the Ukrainians have shown a degree of flexibility that is almost surprising. So again, I think if you look globally, first acknowledging that there are more threats and challenges and they're more complex and dynamic than at any time, certainly since the end of the Cold War, if not the end of World War II. But really the plate that's bigger than all the others in that tent is the plate that represents the U.S., China, and also with our Western allies and partners relationship. Then you'd start to focus on Russia.
Absolutely. And that is one reason the president is calling for a $1.5 trillion defense budget in 2027. One reason he's been talking about the Golden Dome, perhaps built partly on Greenland. You know, the president has made a point to pressure the defense contractors to build more and build faster so that we are ready should a major issue with communist China arise. How close would you say China is to moving on Taiwan? And what would that look like, sir?
Well, you know, you can de-risk a lot of things in the world. In fact, I do that in the business community, as you know, chair of the KKR Global Institute. And we identify geopolitical risks, and we often in anticipation of something happening, such as the invasion of Ukraine in 2022. We'll actually de-risk our portfolio. It's really hard to de-risk confrontation between the United States. Right now, again, it is severe competition. And what we have to do is make sure that that does not turn into actual military conflict. That would be disastrous for the global economy. And again, it's something that would affect every country and every sector of the global economy. So the key is deterrence. And deterrence is a function of two elements: potential adversaries' assessment of your capabilities on the one hand, and your willingness to use them on the other. And we have to ensure that they are rock solid. They have to be very clear about what we might do in the event of some kind of military action without being needlessly provocative. We don't want to do that. We want to have a solid relationship, even noting again how severe the competition is between us in a variety of different spheres, economics principally among them right now. But then when it comes to our forces, we've got to really pick up the pace. And that's the reason for pushing our industrial complex in the United States to get back to the arsenal of democracy that it was that helped us win in World War II and helped our allies as well. It's got to be much more responsive. I wish DOGE had actually focused on the military procurement system and figured out how to blow it up and start over, because it is not as responsive as it needs to be, especially at a time when defense innovation is so extraordinary. I just got back from Ukraine on Sunday afternoon after my 9th trip there since the invasion of 2022. And the innovation that's taking place there is literally breathtaking. It's all about unmanned systems and systems of systems, even the software and the hardware to pull it all together. We need to be learning from that much more rapidly than we are. And our industries need to be learning that as well. Finally, the Ukrainians are actually going to be able to export some of what they're doing. By the way, they're going to produce 7 million drones this year alone. Wow. Think about that. And that's not just in the air. And it's not just short-range suicide. It's long-range. It's maritime drones. How did a country that has no navy, Ukraine, sink well over 1/3 of the Russian Black Sea Fleet? Aerial drones that find the Russian ships, maritime drones that sink them. And the Russian ships are now all tied up. Those that are left are all tied up inside a port as far from Ukraine as they can get in southeast part of the Black Sea. So again, this is the future of warfare. Increasingly, there's already autonomy starting to be used there as well, where if the command and control link with an aerial drone is broken, it can finish the mission on its own, given the computing power that it has on board and the algorithm that has been established for it. And again, we have got to be learning much more rapidly than we are. We see the kind of effort in the Pentagon from the top there through the service secretaries and chiefs of the services. They're pushing very, very hard. They know this needs to be done, but we've got to get quicker about the military-industrial congressional complex, which often has a vested interest in getting more of the legacy systems rather than the cutting-edge systems. Ukraine has a system right now that is producing tomorrow's technology for today's war. And by the way, Russia is innovating very rapidly, too. We need to get much closer to that. Some people argue that our system is so slow that at times it produces yesterday's technology for tomorrow's war instead of tomorrow's for today's.
Right. Well, this is really important, and that's one reason the president has stressed to the defense sector, put your buybacks and your dividends aside and focus on what the country needs. Look, you mentioned the Russia situation. What do you believe it is going to take for Russia to actually stop its attacks on Ukraine? One thing that I have worried about and voiced many times is the fact that the U.S. military bought drones from DJI, a Chinese company. I know that we're no longer buying new drones, but they're still in our arsenal, Chinese drones being used by the U.S. military. What are your thoughts on what it is going to take to actually stop Russia right now, General?
Well, first of all, for us, what we need to do is not only stop buying end items, we need to stop buying anything in the supply chain. You need to have 100% of the components in that supply chain from the U.S. or trusted allies. And there's a long way to go with respect to some of the items in that are needed for our defense industries, because they're not made in the quantity that we need anywhere else than China. So that's one issue. But when it comes to what do we need to do collectively, And of course, there will be a big emphasis here again, as there was at the Defense Ministerial by NATO yesterday, where our Undersecretary for Policy laid out the need, the imperative for Europe to do more for its own defense. And by the way, they are. They're going to get to 3.5% of GDP on defense, not just the old 2%. The EU just committed 90 billion euros, so about 110 billion dollars to Ukraine. That'll solve their fiscal and economic problems for the next 18 months. But what we need to do is get the package of sanctions that Senator Lindsey Graham and others in the Senate have. I believe they literally have 90 out of 100 senators supporting this now, to get that package through the White House and to complement, amplify what it is that the EU has done in this regard. Because, again, they have actually been moving out. The encouragement from the U.S. and the threat from Russia has really galvanized them in a way I've never seen. And I was in and around NATO for nearly 37 years.
Right.
So what we need to do is add to the sanctions. We need to crush the Russian war economy, which is, by the way, much more fragile than people realize. Inflation is way up. The ruble is way down. Interest rates are very, very high. Nobody's going to borrow money and invest there anytime soon. And they're running out of money in their national welfare fund, which is what they've been using basically to keep the military industrial complex going together with Chinese components. So we need to put more pressure on the economy with sanctions, reduce what people are buying in terms of oil and gas. And India, as part of the tariff deal, pledged to reduce what it is buying. It was the biggest customer for oil. And then there's got to be discouragement, real action against China for continuing to fuel the Russian war machine with all of these components, brushless motors, rare earths, and so forth. So that should be the only when Putin looks in the mirror and says to himself, you know what, we need a cessation of hostilities, not just the Ukrainians. Only then will he truly negotiate at the table. And right now, that is not evident. After every round of negotiations, there seems to be something encouraging. And then Medvedev or one of the others will come out and say, our demands are still the same. So they have not fallen off those, and we need to do more to them.
General, it's been a pleasure talking with you. We so appreciate your leadership on all of this. And great point that China is selling those components for the military right now to Russia, to Iran as well. General, thank you so much. We will be watching your work at the Munich Security Conference. Thank you, sir. General David Petraeus in Munich. We'll be right back.